President Biden is now on his way to Europe for the annual G20 Summit. The president will have an audience with Pope Francis in Vatican City on Friday. He will also meet with French President Emmanuel Macron for their first face-to-face meeting since the U.S. agreed to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. Biden will also participate in the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome over the weekend. He will then travel to Glasgow in the U.K. for the World Leaders Summit at the UN Climate Change Conference. So a busy agenda. For more on the president's trip, I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who joins me now from Rome. Hi, Weijia. So President Biden is set to meet with Pope Francis tomorrow. President Biden is only the second Catholic president in U.S. history. White House officials have said this meeting will be both personal and formal. What can we expect to come out of this?
Well, President Biden is the second Catholic American president in history, but really he's the first one to be as open as he is about his faith. He is deeply religious and talks at length and often about his faith and how he relies on the church. And he quotes Pope Francis a lot. So we do expect that this will be personal in that sense for the president, also because they have met before on numerous occasions, and the president and the Pope have talked before about the president's late son, Beau. And so the Pope is really well aware of how President Biden depends on his faith to get through times like that. But of course, they have a lot of formal business to talk about as well, things that they agree on, like climate change, like migration, like helping the poor. The Pope will likely talk about increasing vaccinations for the poor around the world. But, you know, it is an interesting time because there is so much friction between American bishops and President Biden. They have actually publicly called for him not to receive communion anymore because of his views about a woman's right to choose versus their views about abortion. And so I expect that will come up. And the interesting part, Tanya, is that there won't be a White House press pool inside the meeting before. I was just chatting with our photographer, Victor, who said he has covered the Pope's meeting with the president before. But in this particular case, we don't expect there will be live coverage from either the Vatican press or from the White House press. So we will have to depend on readouts that we get from people in the room as far as what they actually talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting, Weijia, as the second Catholic president, and as you said, the president who's been most open about his faith, it's interesting that there has been so much friction between the American Catholic Church and this president. Of course, part of that is around his stance on abortion rights, of course, but it is an interesting thing to see play out, and I wonder if that will be part of their conversation behind closed doors. Weijia, the president is also planning to meet on the sidelines with several world leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron. This comes after the tense diplomatic issue with the Australian submarine deal. So how do we expect that meeting to go?
Well, it's hard to tell because certainly President Macron has made his views very clear about how he felt betrayed, not only by Australia, but by the U.S. and the U.K. for creating this deal, which meant that a French deal worth tens of billions of dollars went away. And so obviously that impacts him and his country very much. And not only Macron, but other officials were very vocal, about President Biden's part in it, talking about the fact that his behavior, I should say, reminded them of the former president and the former administration, which are fighting words. So the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has tried to smooth this over. He has had phone calls with his counterpart with the French to try to say the communication about the deal should have been better, to try to acknowledge some responsibility. But, we won't really know what that meeting will be like until we can see them next to each other, maybe read some body language, because obviously there is a long history, a very important allyship between these two countries, and France has made very clear that they feel like it is now vulnerable.
Definitely some ruffled feathers that will be needing some smoothing over there. Next on the agenda is the G20 Summit. What are some of the major economic issues on the agenda we can expect the president and other world leaders to discuss?
Well, I think they'll certainly talk about all the things that Americans are experiencing that are issues around the world. For example, the supply chain holdup that is impacting not only Americans, but really everybody, as you know, COVID continues to be a major factor for supply and demand. They'll talk about energy prices. They'll talk about the climate. They'll talk about COVID sharing. There's a lot of pressure on these rich countries to donate more. Of course, the U.S. has already donated hundreds of billions of doses and expect to do even more. I should say million, but they expect to ramp that up by next fall. And so it is a pressing issue because even though it seems that the cases are going down in the U.S. and the number of hospitalizations and deaths are, scientists, researchers have said we're not ever going to really get out of this pandemic until there is global vaccinations. And right now there are so many countries that are still waiting. And so that will be a major talking point as well. And also President Biden is going to talk a lot, I think, about a global tax on corporations that he has pushed for and is certainly going to be part of the conversation too.
Right. And the president, of course, will then head to the UK for the UN Climate Summit. The conference comes, of course, as he tries to hammer out his infrastructure bill that would help the U.S. meet certain climate goals. So I guess we'll find out whether he will, enter the meeting triumphant or with his tail between his legs. What are some of the major policies President Biden and other world leaders will try to highlight during this conference?
So, it's no accident that the president held this very formal event that appeared to be a victory lap right before getting on the plane to come abroad. Because if he had left without any sort of defined progress, it would have been difficult for him as he leads these conversations at the climate summit, because he has said he wants the U.S. to reclaim its position as a leader in fighting global climate change. Well, you can't really do that if you cannot present to other world leaders the plan that America has to do it in its own country. And so, I think that he's hoping that this optimism that he's expressing, that you guys have been talking about on this show, will be enough to show world leaders that, hey, we are trying, we have a plan, this is what we will do to cut U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. That is a very clear goal of President Biden's. Now, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, was asked directly, since nothing's been passed yet, since his signature is not on any bill, there's just currently a framework and a plan. Is that going to damage his credibility and his leverage as he has these conversations? And Sullivan said that other world leaders understand the process of legislation, and they understand and they can see the dedication that the president has devoted to getting somewhere, to making progress. And he says he believes that will be enough to prove that the president means it when he says he will do whatever he can to cut emissions. But again, this has to be a joint effort by all parties, including Congress. So whether the figures will be enough to get to that target, since we are still waiting for the text. But certainly it helps, I think, to show that this is the framework that we're working on. And, he will, along with other leaders, push for other countries to commit to similar targets that he already announced.
All right, Weijia Jiang in Rome, thank you so much.